To the CryptoCannaVerse show, an international faith-based show that provides a platform for entrepreneurs within the 5 C's: Christ, cannabis, cryptocurrency, cybersecurity, and certified public accountants. Here at the CryptoCannaVerse show, we assist entrepreneurs in growing their business by connecting them with investors, advisors, and partnership opportunities. The show is hosted by Alan Lau and myself, Crystal Wampler. Our show's schedule is booked through February 2024. If you would like to be a guest speaker or learn more about the companies on this show, please contact us at crystal@kinetics.com. You can be ethical in business. Today's show is broadcast live across various platforms, including Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Our network consists of an array of business owners, Web3 launchpads, VCs, family offices, blockchain and crypto hedge funds, high net worth CPAs, attorneys, investors, and angel investors. Before we introduce our good friend, mentor, and guest for today, Alan, please present our Bible verse.
Yes, thank you everyone for, do we have an echo? Thank you everyone for joining our CryptoCannaVerse show. We're truly blessed on having the show continue on every single week. Before I go through the Bible verse and read the Bible verse to everybody, I'd like to just thank you for Anthony for always, starting from the beginning, always been here, always been through every single session, and truly blessed to have you and grateful and show us a lot of gratitude to always support us in many different ways. So just wanted to say that before I begin. So today's verse comes from Psalms. Psalms is like a song of Psalms. A lot of David wrote a lot of this about the director of music. So Psalms 56, 3-4, and it reads, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" So if we remember the stories in Psalm, David, most of the time in the book of Psalm, is actually running away and hiding in caves, from their enemies trying to, kill him and try to capture him. So oftentimes he would have these verses and songs to kind of just calm himself down, but knowing that you have the full reliance on God and trusting him that you will get out of this. So I wanted to read the commentary because I think the commentary also explains the meaning behind the verse, so we can all meditate it. So David stated, "What can mere mortals do to me? How much harm can people do to us? They can inflict pain, suffering, and death, but no person can rob us of our souls or the future beyond this life. How much harm can we do to ourselves? The worst thing we can do is to reject God and lose a future with him in eternity." Jesus said, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Instead, we should fear God who controls this life and the next." So it's a really comforting knowing in the verse that, hey, no one can kill the soul. They can kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. And I think that having the soul is so important as we continue to live our lives with Christ.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you. The CryptoCannaVerse show presents speaker Anthony Fino, partner of Primary Growth Partners. Today, Friday, September 15th, 2023. Anthony has executed over $500 million in strategic investments across commercial real estate, cannabis, health and wellness, hospitality, and entertainment. Anthony's career began in 2001 with FABA International, where he revolutionized the local commercial markets for secondhand clothing in Ghana, West Africa. In 2014, he purchased Costa Rica's longest running yoga retreat center, Samasati. With his team, they then successfully repositioned a 26-year-old hospitality business, spearheading an effective rebranding and marketing strategy. Shifting his focus to cannabis in 2017, Anthony joined Primary Growth Partners and has been pivotal in brand building with California's top cannabis operators. Today, Primary Growth Partners is a licensing and marketing firm serving the cannabis industry and is solely focused on bringing in-house brands to the market by developing and deploying highly recognizable brand IP paired with California genetics. Anthony has been a board advisor to Rise of the Butterfly since 2010. Rise believes in the power of art to change people and people to change the world. He is also an advisor to Florence Belsky Foundation since 2020, connecting people, sharing ideas, empowering each generation to teach others. Anthony, welcome to the CryptoCannaVerse Show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Anthony, before we get into, asking you more questions about your company, can you kind of, tell our audience a little bit more about you and where you grew up and what that was like? And yeah, that would be fantastic if you could do that for us.
Sure. So I grew up in New York City with a single mother, and my father, my biological father, was quite ill early on in my life and passed away. And so my mother raised me in New York City. She worked multiple jobs. And so as a young boy, I took on a lot of responsibility at an early age. And I developed a strong independence about me, having grown up in that kind of an environment. And I've also, always been inspired by entrepreneurial activities. And so from a very early age, that independent streak resulted in me having various small businesses, even as a young boy, in middle school, in grade school, in middle school, and in high school. And so being in New York City was a great experience. There's a lot of inspiration all around, art and culture. And so those are values that I've really held on to, the importance of diversity, the importance of inclusion, the importance of creativity and art expression and self-expression, the importance of having an impact on not just your own family, but the people around you and the community at large has been very important. I eventually went to the University of Florida, where I studied international economics. And I studied economics not because economics was something that I thought I would be an economist, but because I could use those theories and philosophies as a business person, as an entrepreneur. And my first business out of college was in West Africa. It had to do with secondhand clothing, and really our project sought to re-envision how the secondhand clothing market functions. It's not typically, it doesn't typically have a very positive impact on the people that it serves, because those people are buying used clothing, and that has an impact on their self-esteem and self-awareness and their culture, especially in a culture-rich place like Africa. It was a real shame to see, children wearing Nike and Adidas clothing when, they could be wearing something locally made, a locally produced textile. And so that project really sought to have an impact on people in a really impactful way, and at the same time generate a profit.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for.
Hang on one second.
Sure.
So sorry about that. So that was basically my upbringing. I took that sense of wanting to have an impact with me, and have been a serial entrepreneur ever since. I've focused mostly on real estate and health and wellness. And, cannabis came into my world in 2017 as an investment opportunity, originally as a real estate investment opportunity. And we went ahead and we invested in a project in Southern California. And that was sort of what kicked off my entry into the cannabis industry. And through some very old relationships, I was able to connect with the folks at Primary Growth Partners, who bring a very distinct perspective to the industry, which is one of traditional consumer packaged goods. They believe that cannabis is ultimately a CPG industry, consumer packaged goods industry, and brands will dominate in CPG. And it's, when we shop for everyday products like cereal, we shop for brands that we found serve our purpose. They speak to our needs. They taste great, right? We come back to them because there's something about the way they've been branded or marketed that speaks to our lifestyle. And so we're taking that same approach with cannabis, which today, not a lot of companies are taking that approach. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of companies do not look at branding that way. So I entered the cannabis space originally as an investor, but then transitioned with this team to focus on branding opportunities and marketing opportunities.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your team and who they are?
Sure. So we're made up of, there's 8 of us total. There are 4 founders, and the founders come from, 2 of them come from traditional consumer packaged goods. They've built several national brands. They've marketed several national brands. And then another founder has an agency that builds brands for Fortune 100 companies for the last 30 years. And so Procter & Gamble, Nestle, Sony, these are the companies that they're working with on a daily basis. So 2 of the founders are traditional CPG guys. The other founder is a very successful cannabis attorney in California. And the others are sort of their support, they're like creative support in the background. And so my job at Primary Growth Partners has been working on day-to-day strategy and operations, but also business development. We're in an early stage of our business as we launch our own brands. And so, you know, our model, our go-to-market model, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is a non-plant touching model where we simply license the IP to an operator who touches the plant. And then we support the brand in the marketplace with marketing from our own dollars. And so my job at this stage, as we bring brands into new states, is to find those operators who are the right partners to carry our brands. And also to raise the capital needed to execute the marketing budgets for those states. I've also done a lot of work on building the marketing go-to-market strategy and plans for those brands in those states. And that's what most of my focus has been on at this time.
That's really interesting, and I have to agree with you. Branding in the cannabis, actually any industry, is super important, but it seems like the companies that are branding in the industry are actually sticking around and not being gobbled up by other folks. So that's good. It's a good business that you have. You have a powerhouse team behind you. That's fantastic. Can you tell us what kind of brands are you building?
Right. So the way we build brands is we first identify an unmet need. That sort of starts it all off. Right? It's all about serving the purpose of a particular audience. And so when we identify what that need is, we can then build products around servicing that need and satisfying that need. And part of that process is not only the research that's involved in identifying where the unmet needs are, but it also involves what we call a limbic branding process. And for those who are not familiar, the limbic system in our brain is responsible for motivation and hunger and desire and many other great emotional attributes that humans have the benefit of actually having, right? So all of that happens in the limbic system. And so when we build brands, we try and speak to that side of the brain that will be, encouraged by something that makes them feel an emotion or gives them nostalgia or is something memorable or recognizable. These are points where the consumer then can emotionally connect with our brand. Then we find and we develop the products to meet the promise that we've made on the package. So that's important because if we've done the beautiful branding and it sounds like it's a good fit for this particular audience, has got this particular lifestyle and this particular need, that's all great. But if that product inside the package doesn't actually do what we said it was going to do, then they probably won't come back and buy it again. So part of identifying the unmet need gives us insight into what kind of cultivars that consumer would want. And so we spent a lot of time looking at how the dominant terpenes work together in a particular cultivar, how they work with the minor and major cannabinoids. And we try and find cultivars that will create the kind of an experience that this consumer is asking for, looking for. We also remind our customers that setting an intention is probably the most important thing you can do to creating a cannabis experience that you want. If we are going to go to dinner with friends And that's what we're planning to do. That's the intention we've set. Well, there's a good chance that we're going to have fun at that dinner while we've consumed some cannabis. If, on the other hand, we wanted to go home and rest for the evening or fall asleep, well, then that's that intention. Now, if the cannabis cultivar and its combination of cannabinoids and terpenes can help move that experience in the direction that we want, well, then that's a win. So part of our process, which we encourage all companies who are into branding to do, is when you've done your research, you've identified those needs, you've developed some ideas and concepts on paper, you then have to test those ideas with your consumer. And when you get really high response rates, positive response rates, then you know you're on the right path. Whether it's the logo felt good for a reason that maybe they don't understand, but it just made them feel good. Or the particular cultivar that you've tested, 80% of them would buy it again. Those are the kinds of things you're looking for when you're testing these products, so that by the time you get on shelf, you've done a lot of testing, you've removed a lot of the risk out of the equation of whether or not people are even going to like it, whether or not this branding speaks to them, whether or not the product smokes the way that you've said it's going to smoke. So we try and eliminate as much of that uncertainty through really thorough research and testing and retesting until we get very high response rates to what we're looking for. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no. So is this how do you ensure the consistency of your brand IP across different states with the regulations and market conditions and each state being so different?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So there's a few ways to look at that. So on the genetic side of things, we've secured genetics from nurseries that can produce identical clones of the genetic that we're using. So our licensees, the people who actually grow it and bring it to market and retail it, they will source their genetics from our genetic source, right? We make that connection so they can deal directly with them. We don't touch the plant. So after we've found the genetics we want and found the right nursery and the tissue culture lab that's going to take care of those genetics, then that group connects directly with our licensee and they do business together. And so periodically, as they go to grow new crops, they'll bring in those fresh genetics to make sure that we're being consistent with what's growing in the grow room. So that's how we guarantee consistency with the actual product itself. As far as the brand IP is concerned, we've done a lot of that work up front. So by the time the brand IP gets to the licensee, that is the logos, the identities, the narratives, the wording that's used, the nomenclature, the words that are used for the products, all those things have been very well thought out and tested prior to them getting to the licensee. So as long as our packager is delivering what we've given them in terms of designs, there shouldn't be any inconsistency. So by the time the licensee is packaging our product into our boxes, the boxes should look like they were when we gave that order to the printer originally. So, but the printer works in a similar way as the genetics people do, right? So our licensee will work directly with our printer, and so they'll deal directly with our printer. And we, of course, have oversight over all of this. So we see what's going on, what's moving, how many packages were sold, how many is the design the way that it was supposed to be when we gave it to them originally, and was it packaged properly? So there is some quality control that we're responsible for after the fact, but that's how we guarantee sort of the packaging is consistent. As far as the marketing is concerned, the marketing is going to be a little bit different in every state. As you mentioned, Crystal, there's a difference in every state with what you can and cannot do with regards to marketing. But for the most part, the narrative is the same. So whether or not we go through A channel or B channel or C channel, it really doesn't matter. It's the messaging is going to be consistent throughout that. So messaging you're going to get in New Mexico is going to be the same messaging you're going to get in Vermont. It'll just be delivered in a slightly different way based on the local regs.
That's good to know. It's really difficult when I go to different states and I try products and they are completely different. It's so disheartening. So that's good that you're taking steps to make sure that everything is aligned and it's the same product and people are getting the experience that they pay for. So it's super important. Could you elaborate on your strategy for achieving lower customer acquisition costs and increasing customer lifetime values?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so all of this stuff that we do in branding and marketing is for really one purpose when it comes to the dollars and cents of it all. It's to drive down those costs. J.W. Marriott, the gentleman who invented Marriott hotels, has a quote where he says, "It costs me $10 to get someone to show up in my hotel one time, the first time, and it costs $1 to get them to return." And so there's a perfect example of customer acquisition costs, right? So we have customer acquisition costs when we first acquire a consumer. And if the product delivers on the promise, then the cost to acquire that consumer the second time drops dramatically. And if they really like the product and they talk about it with their friends, well, therein lies another way to reduce that cost to acquire that next consumer. So this is important because customer acquisition cost drops right down to the bottom line. So if I'm lowering my customer acquisition cost, that's going to reflect at my profit and loss at the very bottom of my sheet. Same goes for lifetime loyalty. If I'm building loyal consumers because my brand speaks to their needs consistently, well, then I can take the lifetime value of that customer buying my product every week, and I've got a larger customer lifetime value. That's really important because if I ever go to sell my company and I'm talking to a potential acquirer, and the acquirer wants to know, well, what's this worth in the future? I can defend that projection and say, well, it's worth XYZ because we know that this customer is buying every week. And we know they'll continue to do that for the next 20 years because we're going to continue to nurture that relationship with them. So these customer acquisition costs and customer lifetime values are important. And the way that you solidify those is with product consistency, products that meet their needs, and then effective marketing that speaks to them, finds them where they're at, communicates that message to them, and gives them a call to action to show up at the store and actually purchase. So this is how you develop those things, and it's done through marketing and brand marketing.
Can you give us an example
of what specifically?
Of a brand that you're building and effective marketing, finding your audience, finding what their needs and desires are.
Yeah, so I see 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩's got some good questions, so we'll come back to those in just a moment. So, well, right now, so Primary Growth Partners has been operating since 2018, and we started off servicing other cannabis brands, mostly in California. And that looked like brand strategy, marketing strategy, operational readiness. That's how we provided support in the early years. In 2020, we pivoted to start developing our own brands. And in doing so, we identified this particular data point that kind of had us scratching our head. The data point said that Gen X consumers in California were spending $130 million a month at dispensary. And when they left the dispensary, they didn't feel like anything in their shopping cart was really speaking to them. And so we unpacked that and we tried to understand, well, what does that actually mean? And what we found was that this consumer is at the middle of their career. They're at the peak of their spending power. Half of them own a home. Half of them are married. Half of them have children. And they're looking for something that they can do everyday things with, like the dishes, or going to dinner with friends, or going for a walk, or doing some watercolor painting, or maybe just relaxing at night. So they weren't looking for things that are like super potent, things that would knock them on their ass and stick them in the couch. They were looking for things they could actually function on. And so we identified that, and we ended up licensing a trademark, Peaceful Easy Feeling, which for those who know is a hit Eagles song that was released in 1972 and ended up being included in their greatest hits album, which went on to become the largest or the best-selling album of all time. And the Peaceful Easy Feeling song is still streamed 500 million times a year annually. So this particular song has been in our American culture for the last 50 years. And so there's a portion of our demographic, boomers and Gen Xers, those are 41 and older, that have a 20 to 50 year history with this song, meaning they've heard it, their parents listened to it, they saw it in a movie, those kinds of things. And so there's a high recognizability with the words peaceful, easy feeling. And of course, peaceful, easy feeling plays really well into a mellower smoke, a mellower cannabis experience, which is exactly what they were looking for. So this is how we create limbic brands. So for those, when we survey our demographic, if they know what peaceful, easy feeling is, 80% of them say, oh yeah, that's the song, Peaceful, Easy Feeling. And then the other 20% are kind of like, well, I've heard of that before, but I'm not sure exactly where I've heard that before. So there's even some still recognizability. So the recognizability factor's one part of it. How well does the words peaceful, easy feeling apply to the particular product that we're putting in the package here? Well, peaceful, easy feeling. You're not going to get a 35% THC situation where you're going to be zonked out, right? You're probably going to get something that's more peaceful, easy, and feeling, right? So it plays well with this mellower category. So we built a line of products for this consumer using the trademark peaceful, easy feeling for a mellower category of products. And so when we put that out there, we market that information to this consumer where they are. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's what I was looking for. That looks interesting to me. That's something I might want to try. Then we drive them into the store where they can buy it, and they'll purchase it. And if we've done our job correctly, and if it's a peaceful, easy experience, there's a good chance they'll come back.
That's a great example. We have 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩𝐭𝐨𝐂 who has a few questions here. 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩𝐭𝐨𝐂, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. How you doing today? Great talk so far. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to open up for questions. How does cannabis fit in with the ESG narrative today?
Well, that's a really great question. So thanks for asking that, 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩𝐭𝐨𝐂. That is something that we all should be thinking about in everything that we do. I will say that there's quite a bit of organic cultivation going on in cannabis. There's, of course, outdoor growing and indoor growing and mixed light. And there's lots of ways to go about cultivating inside of those environments. And organic is one way to do it. There are a lot of companies, and more companies doing that these days. And that's probably because the consumer wants that. And so that's one positive aspect. There is an issue, though, with cannabis. It uses a tremendous amount of energy. And so this is something where, individual cannabis cultivation facilities should be employing, renewable energy resources to fuel their facility. So whether that's solar or wind, these are the kinds of things that are important, but that's not always happening. So there's a huge improvement at the cusp for the cannabis industry to do that. I will also add, though, that the whole notion of growing indoors is a phenomenon that really is unique to the cannabis industry. There are other industries that will cultivate with mixed light, but pure indoor cultivation is really something that started in the cannabis industry. And it was because cannabis cultivators had to operate under the radar. And so doing something indoor was obviously less of a chance of you being caught than doing something outdoor. And indoor cultivation is very energy intensive. So these are issues that the industry is grappling with. And there are ways to offset that by using renewable energy, but that's not something that's required right now by state regulators or local regulators in most cases. So these are areas where there can be improvements. There's also a lot of water used. Indoor cultivation especially uses a significant amount. And so this is another area where there can be improvements in the way that the cultivation is done so that there's less water used, or they're just more efficient, or they're capturing their water and catching water and using that water and and then filtering it and reusing the water. That's something that some municipalities mandate, others don't. That's an area of improvement. As far as the social benefits, obviously cannabis is fairly well documented that there are medicinal benefits. There still needs to be more research done on that notion. For years, the University of Mississippi was the only institution allowed to actually conduct medical studies. And that was quite limited. Now that we've sort of progressed out of that space, there's a lot more going on in the understanding of how it impacts the body. So that's one positive aspect from the medicinal side as far as society goes. Of course, there's a huge opportunity to help move disadvantaged or those who have been impacted by the war on drugs out of, unforeseen circumstances where they're not, they don't have access to the kinds of resources that it takes to run a good business, or the capital required to run those businesses, or the mentorship that they'll need to help guide them through and steer them through the tough times. So it can have a positive social economic boost impact. And a lot of it is focused on social equity applicants, but quite honestly, those social equity programs have not been executed very well. And so there's a huge room for improvement on that. There's also, of course, the issue of social justice, which is another big thing, right? I mean, if you, like me, grew up around the war on drugs, we were raised to think that this is a horrible thing and that you're a bad person if you're going to do it and you shouldn't, all that stuff. I mean, and then, of course, the folks that have been imprisoned for, carrying cannabis or selling cannabis, I mean, really minor offenses. These are the kinds of things that need to be justified. I know that the more progressive side of Congress is asking for social justice issues to be included in a first Congress cannabis bill. Of course, the SAFE bill, which really focuses on loosening up banking restrictions, is probably the first to come out of Congress, and the progressive side of Congress is really hoping that, or lobbying for, social justice elements to be included in that bill. So that's another area for improvement. Of course, there's the flip side to, I talked about the medicinal side, is that there are health concerns too, right? Overconsumption or misuse can lead to other health issues that are still not fully understood. So that's an area where there can be some improvement. Youth access. I mean, when I think of youth access, I think of brands like Cookies and how that's just a disaster waiting to happen, right? Cookies is, the name of their brand is called Cookies. It sounds like something for kids. So Cookies is going to have to figure something out. When cannabis becomes federally, when they remove federal prohibition, that's going to be a question that companies like Cookies and other brands that do the same thing, how they market and brand themselves, is going to be an important piece of how that impacts, the youth's perception of cannabis. It's a very important thing, right? We don't want our children consuming cannabis before their brains are fully developed. So this is an area where there can be some improvement. I mean, I think that covers quite a bit in ESG, 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩. Are you still there, 𝐂𝐫𝐲𝐩, or did you have to hop? I think you had to hop.
Dropped off or hopped off.
Yeah, I had to leave.
Okay, but I mean, I thought that do you want me to cover more on that? I thought that was pretty comprehensive.
No, that was extremely comprehensive. Thank you. Appreciate that. Going back to your company and the partnerships that you're looking for, can you tell us a little bit more about the criteria of the partnerships, cannabis operators, within each state that you're looking for?
Yeah, this is such a big piece of what we do, because of course our brands are just concepts on paper until they hit the marketplace. And who brings it to market? It's like everything. It's like once we hand the baby, it's like we hand the baby off, and then it's like, well, what are they going to do with it? So it's an extremely important piece of our business. And so we work very hard to research and do due diligence to identify who the right partner is going to be. And so it's an easier equation than it looks. Or I should say it's the reverse. It's actually more complicated than it looks, because in some cases, we don't want to deal with a company that's too big, because then we may not get the right terms for our brand. So we're looking for privately owned companies that are dominant in their state, but they're not multi-state. Maybe they have a location or two in another state, adjacent state, but for the most part, they're focused on one state. We look for operators that have real business operating experience, those who have run businesses successfully outside of cannabis or inside of cannabis, those that know how to communicate well, are professional, and have great communication. These are things that are very important to our business. So we feel confident that they can bring it to market, that when times get tough, there's going to be a way to work it out because there's good communication. And I mean, those are the main factors. One of the selling points for our capital at this, when we're raising money at this point, and people say, well, you're pre-revenue because the brand hasn't started generating revenue yet. That's right, because we're not on shelf yet, right? So when we sign a licensing agreement, it takes 9 to 12 months before we can actually get on shelf. And that's because it's an agricultural product, and genetics have to be fashioned, and then they have to be grown, and then it has to be packaged and all that jazz. And so it takes 9 to 12 months for that to happen. So we're committed when we connect with these licensees. It's important that they've got a dominant presence in their state. They don't have to be number one, but they've got to have a real solid business. They've got to have not only, an attractive consumer retail experience, but they've also got to have a handle on how well they grow cannabis, right? What's their pest management protocols like? How buttoned up are their facilities? Who's in charge? Who's at the wheel? These are the kinds of things that are super important, right? So we can grow solid product. And then when it shows up on their shelf, there's a real customer experience, a consumer-centric experience happening at the retail level. These are areas that are on the surface are important, but behind that, it really comes down to how professional they are, how much experience they have as operators.
Thank you for answering that question. Clayton, you have a question?
I actually have two. So the first one, or two unrelated. So first one, so if you, Anthony, were an investor and in a product itself and not in the shoes that you're in, what would you look for?
If I was an investor in a situation like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as an investor myself, and I've invested in this company myself, and I've been an investor for quite some time. I mean, I look for non-plant touching. And I do that because I've now been around long enough in cannabis to know how arduous the operations can be when you're dealing with overtaxation and overregulation. Because we don't touch the plant, we're not subject to IRS tax code 280E, which is just a huge suppressant for the cannabis operators. They can't reinvest their capital, and they're overtaxed, right? They're spending more money on taxation than they should. That really hampers growth, not only at the individual company level, but for the entire industry. So we're not subject to the IRS tax code. That's something that I look for. I also look for the fact that we're not involved in the cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, or retailing of cannabis. And so there's just a lot that comes with that, right? That's a risky business. If you've been in the business, and we have, of acquiring licenses and real estate and all that stuff, it's a lot of expense and time and money, buying facilities, buying licenses, staffing those facilities. It's just a lot. And it's not such a straightforward process. Cultivation is seen as something that's supposed to be pretty easy and straightforward. It's not. This plant is finicky at times. It's difficult to cultivate. There are problems that happen in the grow room. So these are things we get to avoid by being non-plant touching. The other thing I look for in a company, and this is what we've built into our model, is that it's readily scalable. In our case, we're dealing with defensible IP assets. So if you take Peaceful Easy Feeling, the trademark has global recognition. It's been around for 50 years. It's defensible, right? There is a place in the world for Peaceful Easy Feeling. People already know what that means and understand where it comes from. So when we can take that IP and avoid having to acquire licenses or facilities and just be able to move into a new state by finding an operator who already has those things in place, where they're already operating successfully, to me, that is a low risk equation. I can easily scale it. As quickly as I can sign licensing agreements is as quickly as we can scale this business. The other thing that I look for is low capital requirements. I don't want to have to spend a lot of money on things other than marketing. In our model, 70% of our money is spent on marketing. Not many businesses can say that. If I can spend 70% of my dollars on marketing and sales, well, geez, that's exactly where I want to be. I'd rather spend it on marketing and sales than paying 20, the staff of 20 people, or the rent on a building in downtown LA, or, a license because we want to move into the next state and we need a license first to do that. Like, I'd rather spend that money on the marketing piece, which is, where you're going to drive sales from. And, in our case, we feel that brands help to future-proof your cannabis business. So if you've got brand loyalty, you've managed to develop that, well, that helps to ensure the lifelong, viability of that business, because you've got a brand that supports it. One of the mistakes the industry made early on, and you probably all remember this, was the large publicly traded companies were just going gangbusters on acquiring cultivation facilities, building cultivation facilities. And so they spent so much capital on just acquiring capacity. And what they didn't focus on was the brands. Part of the reason was because there's been so much demand at a retail level, in part because cannabis being sold at a retail store is still a novel idea for a lot of folks. But there's this initial, unsatiable demand for cannabis products because it can be bought in a store. And so a lot of these companies were just basically feeding off of that demand. Didn't matter what they put on shelf, it was going to sell. They just needed the capacity to service all those demands. So that eventually, we think, that eventually runs its course. And supply and demand end up balancing out at some point. And what really ends up standing tall at the end of the day is the power of the brand and the brand loyalty associated. So we feel that to an extent, we future-proof our business by creating, defensible IP assets that are easily scalable without the, challenges and hurdles of cultivation, manufacturing, distro, or retail, or 280E. So these are the kinds of things we look for in a business, especially in cannabis. And that's why we've built this model in this fashion.
Great, thank you. My next question is more about you. I've gotten to know you over the last year through doing these every week, and gotten to know your personality a little bit, and have met other people that are in marketing per se. You have a different personality than a lot of these people. What do you think is unique about your personality that makes you so successful in what you do?
I can actually answer that for you, because knowing Anthony for so long, like when I first met Anthony, he was at these events, and we always network. And I always viewed him as he's very easy to speak to. He connects with you immediately. Like you feel like that synergy immediately. And I think that's what makes marketing so valuable for marketers, because you're able to convey a message like Anthony was talking about not only the product itself is itself, but if you tie it into the emotional aspect of connecting the product to that customer or the consumer's emotional state, either through a song, either through words, either through packaging or color or something of that nature, I think that really defines Anthony, because I feel like when we talk, and I know him for a very, very long time, he has that vibe, the energy that just draws you in, you know what I mean? So I know you're married, Anthony. So
I love that. Thanks, Alan. It was nice to hear that. I'm going to drive down into Clayton's answer, because his answer is really about what makes us great marketers. Is that right, Clayton? Is that what you're basically asking? Right.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to start by saying that I'm a big believer in kindness, just as a general way of being. I really don't think this is something that most people fully understand the power of, just simple kindness. Nobody wants to work with someone who's full of themselves or has an agenda or wants to convince you of something. I mean, there is something so simple about just being kind. We're all human beings. We're all made up of the same stuff. There's slight differences, and most of that is from our experiences in life. But for the most part, we're basically the same creatures. And so if we can have some empathy with each other and understand that the world is bigger than just the world around us, that there is a bigger picture here. There's something bigger for all of us here. I think that puts it into perspective. So when I'm showing up anywhere in my life, I'm trying to stay as grounded as possible. I'm trying to just be present to what's in the space. Who are the people I'm speaking with? Let me meet them where they're at. And it comes from a genuine interest and curiosity in people. When I was growing up, it comes back to the original question Crystal had. I was by myself most of the time. Mom was working. And Mom thought it was strange that I would spark up conversations with random strangers on a regular basis. She thought it was so strange that she enrolled me in a therapist to specifically ask about why is he doing this? And after spending a few months with that therapist, the therapist sat down with my mother and said, well, there's nothing wrong with Anthony. He's just an extrovert and you're an introvert. There's nothing wrong with that. Just let him do that. So I feel like there's, part of it is, the perspective that I grew up around, which was, you got to figure this out yourself because there's no one here to tell you how to cook that lunch. There's nobody home right now. And, growing up in a place like New York City, you're surrounded by people. I grew up in an apartment building where I think there were 250 units in the building. And the building was a safe place. I could walk around the building and knock on people's doors. And I would spend time with a lot of the elderly in those buildings. And I would just hours, I'd be an 8-year-old boy having conversations with a 95-year-old, person in their apartment. And who knows, I don't remember what we were talking about, but those were the times when I developed an awareness for the vast array of what's possible for a human being. And so I brought that with me, and I have always felt that just being kind to people is a really basic thing that we can all do. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. As far as like how that impacts marketing is something that first has to be understood through deep research. And I feel like the less of an ego you have going into that process, the more open you'll be to the information that's out there. Getting really clear about who and why, right? Because I could pretend I know exactly what someone wants, or I can really dig around to find out what they want. So, removing oneself from the picture, removing my preconceived notions of how the world spins or what people do or don't want, leaving that aside, leaving the ego at the door kind of thing, and just being like, all right, let me be completely present with where these people are at, where I'm going to find them, how I'm going to communicate with them, how do they want to be communicated to? It's not really up to me. It's up for them to tell me how they want to be communicated to. So I think to be a successful marketer, you not only have to be willing to rest aside all of your beliefs and just listen and do the research and ask the right questions, but then you've got to be willing to put that into play and take action. And so in cannabis, we've been successful marketers in other businesses. In cannabis, we've been successful with other brands marketing, but we haven't yet started marketing our own brands. And so how are we doing that? Well, we do that by fully understanding who our demo is. Who is our audience? Where do they show up? Where do they shop? Where did they go? Where did they visit before they came to the dispensary? Where were they? Were they at the supermarket? Were they at the pharmacy? Where did they go after the dispensary? Did they go have dinner? Did they go home? Right? We want to understand those things. That's what makes us effective marketers, because we can explain to our marketing partners, this is who our consumer is. This is where our audience is going. This is what they're responding to. And so then we partner with our marketing partners who will help us actually deliver that message through the variety of channels that exist today. And so this is how we feel like we're effective marketers. Short of getting into the specific strategies of how we market to them, we do that based on information that they've given us, right? Not information that we just invented.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. I think that's an interesting history of you, in your apartment building, just visually seeing you going around and, asking questions and, gaining and downloading all of this wisdom from, our seniors. It's so powerful, learning to listen, being authentic and genuine and kind. Those are all things that make, a fantastic partner, a fantastic person, and helps build, iconic brands. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are your projections for your company's growth and market penetration in the new states you're currently in talks with, and what states are those?
So we started licensing Peaceful Easy Feeling to operators at the beginning of this year. We've signed one licensing agreement roughly every 60 days, and we've now signed into California, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Vermont. We won't come on shelf in California probably for another couple of years. In the meantime, we've used this licensing agreement to collect data on consumers. But we will be on shelf in New Mexico, which will be the first state to come online for Peaceful Easy Feeling in February of 2024, followed by Oklahoma, Vermont. We're in talks with 4 other states, including Massachusetts, Arizona, Colorado, and Missouri. We're probably going to sign Massachusetts, let's say in the next 60 days. And there may be another one state signed before the end of the year. But I do expect us to be in about 8 states by next summer for Peaceful Easy Feeling. Behind Peaceful Easy Feeling, we have other brands that are being developed. One such brand is called Malibu Reef, and the licensees that we've already signed with in the states that I've discussed are also interested in Malibu Reef. So we plan on growing pretty quickly. And as I said earlier, 70% of our budget goes towards marketing, and with every state we go into requires an entirely new marketing budget. So at this point, we're raising growth capital to fuel entry into new states as quickly as we can. We think that this will persist for, that will grow into states with Peaceful over the next 3 or 4 years, and then potentially look for an exit at that time.
What kind of investors are you looking for right now?
So capital raising has been challenging, as a lot of folks are aware of that. We have found some success outside of cannabis, in particular the arts, entertainment, film, have been folks that have have an affinity for cannabis. They are open to alternative type investments because they're already invested in sort of the arts world. They've shown up and written checks. And as long as Main Street perceives cannabis as not doing well, i.e., how the stock market is doing, for example, or how Congress is legislating cannabis initiatives, those are things that really move the meter for mainstream investors. And that's been challenged, as you all know. However, of course, in the last few weeks, we have seen some positive developments in that world. And as a matter of fact, stock prices have rebounded and held those gains. So we think that there's something maybe shifting in the way of how the mainstream consumer or mainstream investor sees cannabis. And then the third group are actually cannabis investors. And a lot of those investors are fatigued. A lot of them have not made good returns on the investments they have made or have been completely burned. And so it's difficult to convince those investors that, hey, this is a good thing. And so we think that as the economy improves, as positive news comes out of Congress, these are the kinds of things that get cannabis investors and Main Street investors off the bench and in the game. In the meantime, we're raising money from alternative type investors.
What can an investor expect to gain if they come to invest with you all?
Well, so we did a fundraise in May of 2021. We raised a little over $500,000, and we expect to do a Series A in about 18 months. So the in-between period, we're selling convertible notes, and those convertible notes are offered in $50,000 increments, and they pay a 12% coupon interest payment on that dollar value, on the principal value of the note. The note is convertible at the note holder's option into equity at a 20% discount to the Series A valuation. So for example, if someone made a $100,000 investment, they would get the return of their $100,000 plus interest by the year 2025. And then they would see a return of roughly $75,000 on that investment in 2026, and then $100,000 return investment in 2027. So over a 4-year period, we're talking about a roughly 3x return on their investment. If we have a liquidity event, well, it could be much higher than that. It could be several times higher than that. So that's what they should expect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I appreciate that. Anthony, where can our viewers and listeners reach out to you?
Probably the best way is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty good at following up on messages from LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me, if you just want to, it doesn't have to be about anything in particular. Let's say you want to talk about your business, or you want to talk about branding in general, or maybe you do want to make an investment. I'll talk with you about any of those things. I'm pretty open to speaking with folks and sharing information. We're big believers that, a rising tide lifts all boats. And we think that branding is something that's going to benefit everybody. How we execute and roll out our brands and how we share the information about how we've done that is just going to help the other companies adjacent to us. And that's going to improve the consumer's experience. That's what we want at the end of the day. So I'm happy to speak with anybody who reaches out. Just feel free.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and being our guest speaker. We appreciate you so very much. Alan, would you mind please closing out in prayer?
Yes, thank you so much. Let's bow our heads and pray. Heavenly gracious Father, Lord, thank you so much that you can bring us all together. Thank you for Anthony Fino, a brother among us that's always been very supportive every single week, in and out, to support us in many different ways. Thank you for his insight in their company and what PGP is doing in terms of a non-plant touching brand that is breaking through the markets of cannabis. We continue to pray for their success, continue to pray for you put in the right people in the right time, right place for them. And just to pray for this weekend that you be with us in all things that we do. And in Christ's name we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alan.
Amen. Thank you, guys.